The position of the Trump administration is that we're going to get the hostages back, and we're going to make sure Hamas is destroyed. And believe me, if this is true, and Israel feels that it's put upon and has to release hundreds of these killers to get the hostages back, people will be upset. Not that the hostages are released, of course, but the price that had to be, and that these terrorists will come back to haunt you in the future.
Well, it's January 14th, and in 6 days, Donald Trump is going to be inaugurated as the 47th president of the United States. There's been a lot of expectation in Israel, with virtual or actual countdown until January 20th, going on really since November 5th. But there's been a lot of stuff that's been happening in the past few days here in Israel that has made a lot of people question what we're going to be getting into in the next couple of years with the incoming Trump administration. And so I'm very glad to have as my guest today on the Caroline Glick Show, my old friend, Victor Davis Hanson, senior fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. I've had him on the show before, and Victor Davis Hanson, I don't think he needs any introduction, so I'm just going to say he's one of the most esteemed historians of our time. He's brilliant in all things, and I consider it a great privilege to be able to call him a friend of mine. So without further ado, Victor, welcome back to the Caroline Glick.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline.
Well, it's great to have you back on the program. You know, when I contacted you a few weeks ago and I asked you whether you'd be able to make time for me, everybody here was so excited about what we were going to be expecting from the Trump administration. And over the past week or so, well, we've seen something that has really flummoxed Israelis and also a lot of Americans who were so enthusiastic about coming into office because they expected to see a totally different policy from Washington or from the United States, from the administration vis-a-vis or towards Israel, especially in our time of war. But, you know, it doesn't seem like we're getting something new. Biden's view has been that the American ace in the hole in the Middle East is that they can put the screws on Israel and deliver for the Arabs. That's what America can bring to bear, is America can get Israel to fall into line. And that has been disastrous. That view by Biden has been disastrous. And yet, here before he's even inaugurated, we have press reports that the hostage deal that seems imminent, which requires Israel effectively to end the war against Hamas and allow them to survive in power in Gaza, and remove most of our troops from some critical areas of Gaza in exchange for a fraction of the hostages, allowed thousands of terrorists out of our prisons, that this was something that Trump demanded that Israel do through Steve Witkoff, who met with the prime minister at his home on Saturday, and according to the news reports, threatened him. So what is this? How do you explain what we're seeing here? How are we supposed to understand what's happening?
Well, if that were all true, I have no reason to doubt that the reports are alleging that. It would be very disturbing. But we got to remember that we're in a very strange period in American history. Usually in this 90 days of transition between the November election and the January 20th inauguration, the incoming administration does not participate in foreign policy or domestic policy. And to underline that, in 2016, the left went after Mike Flynn and destroyed his career for making a call to a Russian, supposedly diplomat, and saying that he had violated something called the Logan Act. It's an archaic, ossified, no one's ever been prosecuted on it. But what's weird about now is, because of the implosion of the Biden administration and his mental debility, it's almost as if the left has abdicated and they're wanting Trump to come in various areas and then take credit. So Biden gave a talk yesterday at the State Department. I think your Israeli listeners would be shocked, but he said that he got out of Afghanistan, so no president will ever have to go back, will follow him in Afghanistan. He didn't mention how he got out and the disgrace that he incurred to the military. But the point is, and Israel, he took credit for the weakening of Iran, the weakening of Hezbollah and Hamas, the idea that hostages will be released, and the fall of the Assad. All of those, to the extent that he could even relate them accurately, were all due to the IDF, every one of them. But he tried, and every one of those cases, he tried to oppose it. So we got this matrix where Trump is not in power yet, and there are people in this cabinet that haven't even been approved. So you have Marco Rubio, who is a very strong advocate of Israel, and he will be conducting foreign policy with his national security advisor, Waltz, who's a very strong. But in this interim period, there's everybody doesn't really know what their job is, because some areas of the Biden cabinet are inviting them in and have just left, and others haven't. So I don't know to what degree this is coming directly from Trump himself, but the narrative that the Trump administration wants to previously be heard in the United States, at least, is something along the lines that I think people in Israel are well acquainted with. In other words, they are going to deter Iran on day one. They're going to reestablish the sanctions. They're going to declare it. They're going to go after the banking, and they're going to stop the inflows. As far as the nuclear reactor, they have a problem, the nuclear program, I should say, because they ran on a Maga agenda. If you read the Maga agenda, it has this clause in it about we don't want to get in what they call forever wars. But there's a contradiction there, because they have no deterrence after Afghanistan and the Middle East, Ukraine. So they're going to have to do what they did last time, and that was kill Soleimani, kill Baghdadi, threaten Iran, bomb ISIS. But that's contrary to the Steve Bannon base of MAGA. So they don't want to go in and have what their opponents or people within the party would say is an optional war to go after Iran. So I think what we in America have heard is that, unlike the Biden administration, when they come fully in power and they can't be faulted under this phony Logan Act accusations that they're running things, they are going to tell the Israelis, we're not going to make a decision for you about Iran, but if you need the necessary equipment to nullify or neuter their nuclear program, we will give it to you. If you need strategic deterrence so that China or Russia does not threaten you, if you attack a new ally of theirs in Iran, we will protect you, and we will give you diplomatic cover. As far as the hostages, the only thing that bothers me, until I read that story yesterday, was there's a deliberate effort on the kind of a jubilation on the part of people around Trump. They say, and they here's the narrative, and I think that it's mostly accurate, but they're saying the world knows that a new sheriff is coming to town, and they're worried. And so some people in the United States, like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos, they all make their truce with Trump. And that same thing is happening overseas. So we have Trudeau is fallen. The German government is in trouble. The Assads thought that Trump might go after them. They crumbled. Iran is now desperate and Hamas is desperate. And Trump likes that idea. And one of the examples that resonates with the people around Trump is, of course, the 1980 Reagan experience. So there were the American hostages were held, and every time they asked candidate Reagan and President-elect Reagan, what is your attitude about the hostages? He said, there will be no hostages. There will be no, and Iran took that as an existential threat and, of course, released them the day, hours before Reagan took office. And Trump, I think, wants that to happen. But to the extent that Trump himself or Marco Rubio or Waltz has said to the negotiating team, go pressure Netanyahu and get a deal. And when I read the leaked versions of the deal, it would be disastrous for Israel. Get a deal under any circumstances. That's disturbing, but I'm not sure that it's accurate, is what I'm saying.
What's disturbing? I mean, there are a couple of things that are disturbing. One is, it's true that Trudeau collapsed under the weight of Trump, and that Mark Zuckerberg collapsed under the weight of Trump, etc. But Hamas isn't Trudeau. Turkey isn't Germany, and it's not clear that people are making a distinction, because we are at war, and we're at war for our survival, and we've been fighting this war. Our best sons have been killed in battle and wounded, and this isn't just something that you can snap your fingers and fix. And so if you go to a deal with Lebanon, as happened, so you get a new government of Lebanon, but it's controlled by people who are hardened enemies of Israel and intend to be at war with Israel, not at peace with Israel. That's the truth regarding the new President Aoun. And it's true regarding the new prime minister, who, while he was campaigning for the position, was trying Israel for genocide at the International Court of Justice. And so, it's a strange situation, but they think that they're going to have peace between Israel and people who support jihad and support Iran.
Everything you said, I agree. Everything you said, I agree 110%. My only hesitation is I don't know to the extent in 10 days from now, or less than that, a week, whether what you outlined and what this special envoy has said, if it's accurate, will represent the official posture of the troika of Trump, Waltz, and Rubio. But I do know if that is floated and that is true, there'll be an enormous pushback in the United States within the Trump circle. The other thing is Anthony Blinken has inadvertently embarrassed the Biden administration. He's already admitted that the pressure he put on Israel was counterproductive to the release of the hostages. And I think everybody realizes that, to the degree Trump, when he said all hell's going to break loose if they don't release the hostages, that brought up the matter, well, what would you do, Mr. Trump? Would you get into a ground war, a messy ground war in Gaza? And I think what he intended was that he would put pressure on Iran, and that Iran would pay a terrible price, and Iran would say to Hamas, you got to release them because they're going to destroy our infrastructure, something like that. And so that was the implied threat, as I understood it. But everybody knows that if you can't negotiate with them, you can only defeat them. The only thing I would say, though, is on the part of Israel, not so much the prime minister, but I think there has to be we have these divisions here, but you have your divisions in Israel, and I'm not sure there's a consensus yet of an Israeli position that outlines, and you and I have talked about this before, how to translate the brilliance of the IDF in Gaza into a strategic resolution. What does Israel want? So I think it's incumbent upon them to come to the United States and say, we want to destroy Hamas, and we will destroy Hamas. But this is what we have to do it. We have to cover all 100% of the territory in Gaza. There can be no refugees. We have to help us address the Egyptian border problem. You have to not have any more arms embargoes on If you do that, we will destroy Hamas. And if we destroy Hamas, this is what we will do. And then they have to tell us what you will do. Is it to we hear all these ideas of what people in Israel are floating, and we don't know which is which. Some people in Israel say we can pressure and work with the Palestinian Authority and have them take over. I don't think that's viable, but that's what people are told here. Or we'll get Qatar and the Emirates to rebuild Gaza, or we'll make it a protectorate of Israel. But I think that confusion, and it's understandable because it's a horrific problem, but that permeates over here. And so people here say, well, the Israelis haven't really given us a program of how they're going to destroy Hamas and what they're going to do afterwards, so they never have a Hamas problem again. And in that void, people freelance.
I think to that point, though, one of the basic problems was that the Biden administration has been so hostile to Israel that we've been put into this sort of lane where, if we refuse to capitulate in sort of a day after scenario that's going to allow the terror to be maintained and grow in Gaza, that we're going to find ourselves under even more harsh.
What do you think the existing government, Netanyahu government's ideal plan would be for Gaza, and would it in a way that would win 51% support from the Israeli public that they could present to the United States?
Well, I think that we've seen repeated polling data that show that the 2/3 to 3/4 of Israelis oppose any role for the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. Over 80% support the annihilation of Hamas. The vast majority of Israelis want to have Israel be the sole power and control of Gaza afterwards, so that you're looking at a fairly large consensus opinion in Israel that Israel is going to have to be in charge of security in Gaza and that no other force can do it. And I think that but we can't have a discussion about that until January 20th. And one of the alarming aspects of what's happening now is that, we had been under the impression that we'd be able to, just sort of, I don't know, coast is the right word, but just, hold our breath until January 20th and then have that kind of discussion with Trump. But what we're having now is a situation where we're being forced permanently into this position where we're not allowed to win, because that's what the ceasefire effectively does to Israel. They say you have to allow 1 million people to go back to northern Gaza. You're not going to reinstate a war. It's not going to be possible.
All I can tell you is when I saw that news story, I asked myself who would support that. So here in the United States, Trump got enormous criticism for appointing Mike Huckabee because he was too much what the left and even some of the Republican Party, and of course I disagreed. I know I like him a lot, that he's a Zionist zealot. So you could never have, the last two ambassadors under Trump have been pro-Israel. Then you look at the three people who will make after January 20th, they will craft foreign policy and present it to the president. Traditionally, it is the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, and the Secretary of Defense. And if Pete Hegseth, whom I know a little bit, and Rubio will be confirmed, I think Hegseth will be too, and Waltz, the three of them do. Their problem right now, I think, will be with the Maga base, the Steve Bannon base, because they are about as pro-Israel as you could be in the United States. And they're going to be the people. And then if you look at the Senate people who are closest to Trump, these are the people who talk to Trump all the time. And they're people like Tom Cotton or Lindsey Graham or people like that. He likes Rand Paul and people like that, but the people who really know stuff that he consults on foreign policy are Tom. And there's no more pro-Israelis. So he's not going to have a lot of people surrounding him that are going to be wishy-washy or appeasing, I don't think. And there's things that have happened in the United States since the election, such as the terrorist attacks in New Orleans and what happened in Germany. And there's a new emphasis on the United States that we have ignored the threat of radical Islam. So I think for now, and believe me, if this is true and Israel feels that it's put upon and has to release hundreds of these killers to get the hostages back, there'll be a big outpouring. People will be upset. Not that the hostages are reached, of course, but the price that had to be, and that these terrorists will come back to haunt you in the future. I would say, though, that when Biden he bought $6 billion, he got almost, it was about $1 billion for 5 terrorists. 5 Americans from Iran. It was about $1.2 billion. That Trump severely criticized that. And we've had a lot of the hostages' parents, because some of them are American citizens, as you know. And so the way it's played here is that the United States under Trump protects its own. And even some of his supporters have said it's like the old Roman, civis Romanus sum. I am a Roman citizen anywhere in the world, and I'm an American citizen, and my country will protect me. So there's some of that at work. The fact that the hostages are Americans, and therefore the Americans feel that they can. Some of them feel that they can operate diplomatically, quasi-independently of Israel, because it's their own citizens, even though to do so and not coordinate would be disastrous for both parties.
See, but the weird thing is that, you were mentioning that, the idea would be that Trump would place pressure on Iran. But
Yes.
really, particularly since the fall of Assad, what we're seeing is that you're getting Hamas is now not so much in the Iranian corner as it is in the Turkish corner and the Qatari corner. And the people who are sustaining Hamas diplomatically, and in the case of the Sunni jihadists that are coming into power in Syria and in Lebanon, also militarily, are the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood aligned regimes in Qatar and in Turkey. And yet Trump has praised Erdogan and Qatar, which really is just Hamas and always has been, is getting rewarded. And we just saw a report this morning that recalled that in August of 2023, it was the Qatari investment fund that essentially bailed Steve Witkoff out and bought his property in New York, the Park Lane Hotel, for $623 million after his partner had run away to China and left him holding a bag of some sort or another. So that, you have these business ties between American businessmen, senior ones, very successful ones, and the Qatari regime, when Qatar is, the state sponsor, the most important, most public, most powerful state sponsor that Hamas has. And so I'm wondering about the direction that the pressure is going, and what the role that the administration, the incoming administration's relations with Qatar, have to do with all of this. And
Well,
how that might impact.
a lot of us over the last 10 years have argued um, that the relationship that was fostered by Obama, and remember, he said that Erdogan was his go-to person in the Middle East, and that led to that disastrous Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt, etc. But our problem is that Turkey is a NATO member, and it has the largest army other than the United States in NATO, but it's not really a NATO member. It doesn't function like a NATO member. It functions like a NATO enemy. That's number one. And while we have all sorts of rules about how to get in NATO, there's nothing in its NATO charter how to get out. And then it's compounded, on the other hand, that we have this huge base near the Syrian border in Israel. And as you remember, during the Turkish coup, so-called coup, Erdogan said, and we have, I think they're called M50s. They're almost one megaton post-war bombs. Are old and they're big. Yeah, and they're there. And Erdogan has said they've been here so long that I don't really want them to be removed. I feel like they're our own. He's threatened to send missiles into, as you know, Gaza. He's threatened to send missiles into Athens. He's threatened to cut off oil to Cyprus. So he does all of this. And then we have this big base with nuclear weapons. I don't know if some people have suggested that we're stealthily taking these weapons out very close. I don't know. But then we have this multi-million, if not billion-dollar, huge base in Qatar. And Qatar was the host of Al Jazeera. Qatar's and both of those countries were under a lot of pressure from the right here in the United States, and even Trump himself. So they have been making frantic efforts to appease or to get on the right side of Trump. And I don't know to what degree they have, but traditionally they have been more comfortable with Biden and Obama, and they were not necessarily too comfortable under Trump. And I agree with you. I don't see much difference geostrategically in the terms of Israel, whether it's Iran as their existential threat or Turkey. In some ways, you think, well, Turkey can be subject to pressures within NATO, but on the other hand, because Turkey is NATO, it's been given allowances and laxities that we wouldn't even think of extending to Iran. And the only pressure we have on Turkey really is the Kurds, that Americans overwhelmingly support the Kurds and want to protect them. And that's something that we have. But it's a big problem here. There's no doubt about it. And
How do you think that Americans who strongly support Trump and have since he entered the political fray in 2015, how do you think that is there something that they can do to influence the direction? Because it just feels like Witkoff is sort of a new Rex Tillerson. Like you said, there is a drift of where people expect where Trump has led the United States during his first term, which is to recognize that far from being, a liability to the United States, Israel wins wars and it's the United States' strongest ally, and it wins wars for America without any American soldiers being endangered in any way. And so, that's the drift. And then you see this deal, which seems like, Tillerson trying to, back in the day, right, trying to embrace or tell Trump that he's enacting his policies while he's really going and trying to get Trump to enact the policies of the State Department.
I've written about this. There's 5 or 6 fault lines that have never been resolved in the MAGA transformations of the Republican Party. One of them is if you add up all of the populist tax breaks that Trump advised, no first responders pay taxes, no military, no Social Security, no tips, and then you add that up and then you try to collate that with what Elon Musk and Ramaswamy have said about cutting, it doesn't add up. It's $1 trillion in tax cuts. If you add on foreign policy, if you look at what the MAGA people say, forever wars, endless wars, and then you see what's necessary to restore U.S. deterrence and not be isolationists, there's going to be a lot of friction on that. If you look at H-1B visas, and you see the MAGA people say we want secure borders.
Professionals?
Yes, people they have to have a BA degree, and they have to prove that an American can't take that job. But what's happened is Silicon Valley, nobody objects for them to bring in PhDs that are really brilliant computer engineers and things like that. But under that visa, a lot of the Silicon Valley's consortia are abusing the law by bringing in thousands of people that have just a BA from a foreign university and can code at a mid-level, and they can pay them much less than Americans can do that job. Everybody thinks we have a shortage of engineers at the top and we want the very top PhDs. So there's a big fight about that and you can see how this is going to get nasty. So for this week, Steve Bannon said, well, Trump is bringing in the Musk, David Sachs type of people, and these are South African immigrants themselves. They're racist, they're white, and he's using them to oppress Americans that are Black and Hispanic. So there's a lot of fault lines. One of the fault lines that Israel falls into then is, to what degree do we spend all of this money overseas on Ukraine? And so far it's been muted about Israel when there's $400 billion to rebuild LA, that it's going to cost $500 billion to straighten out 12 million illegal aliens, build the wall, all that. And so these things come up, but all I can tell you that in this debate, the people who want to pressure Israel are in a minority of the people around Trump. Now, it is true when Trump himself said, though, he said himself, at least on 2 occasions, I'm going to be a lot better than I did the first time, because the first time I hadn't been to Washington and I made two mistakes. I brought in the swamp or the bi-coastal or uni-party people, and I brought in people who had success in business. And that he was talking about people like Rex Tillerson and a few others. So, he was talking about Rex Tillerson and then probably some people at defense. So, uh, all I can tell you is all the people he's appointed so far have been criticized for being too pro-Israeli, and the people that he had last time were criticized for not being pro-Israeli enough. So I don't know let's see what happens in a week when this becomes official policy and it's publicized, leaked, and I don't know. So far, the general consensus is that we hear from our Iranian experts and people that are talking that there's suppressed glee in Iran because there's an expectation that something big is going to happen vis-a-vis United States or Israel and Iran, and very quickly. But I don't know to what degree that's accurate.
So a couple of questions before I let you go. So the first one is regarding Iran, which is, there's a lot of cross currents also in the discourse in Israel, between Israelis who have for the past 20 years refused to look at what American policy actually is and say, well, this is an American problem, the Iranian nuclear problem, and it's an American job to handle it. And now that we're getting Trump back in, America is going to handle it. They're going to take care of the nukes. And then there's the other side that says, I put myself in that category of people say, look, the United States has refused to take action against Iran for 20 years, and there's no indication whatsoever that they will. And I'm wondering whether, given the never war camp in the administration, in the Maga world, whether Israel is going to be putting itself into a bind if we don't attack Iran before October 20th, and then the expectation would be that Trump would have to greenlight it in some way or another. Is it wrong for Israel to be expecting American support, either in terms of saying, yes, you go do what you need to do and we'll give you the means, or to say we're going to work on it with you in order to get rid of it, when really what Israel should just be doing is not it's not asking for permission at all.
I think it's pretty clear what he wants. He said that he hoped that Netanyahu solved the problem before he came into office. But as I said earlier, I think what he envisions, and I can't speak for the administration, but from what they've said and a few people I've talked to, I think their idea is that this new China, Iran, North Korea, Russian axis, they're going to tell them to butt out, and they are going to tell Israel, we're not going to do it for you, but we're going to allow you to make the that you want to do. We're not going to tell you what to do, but if you decide that it's in your strategic interest for survival, and that this is a rare moment when their air defenses are slowly recovering, but not recovered yet, and you need weaponry, intelligence, and geostrategic support, we're going to give that to you and support you diplomatically. And that's very different than, I think, what the Biden administration does. When you mentioned you have this breakdown, you got to remember something about the United States that I think people in Israel know about, but maybe sometimes forget. We are at an all-time high. 16% of the population is foreign-born. We allowed 12 million people in. 50 million Americans were not born in the United States. Here where I'm speaking from, 27% of the California population was not born in the United States. And most of these, not all, come from failed states in Latin America, Southeast Asia, Mexico. And they become constituents of the federal government. Almost all of them are poor, without language facility, and they go on federal entitlements through an open border. And the Democratic Party wants those people to come in. And the problem is that, as you see on the campuses, we have almost the demonstrations that are virulently anti-Semitic and anti-Israel are characterized by either students from the Middle East that are the ringleaders, but the participants are what I call DEI. And so the diversity, equity, inclusion has now categorized Israelis as white settler oppressors in that binary they use. And in addition to that, and I have to be very careful here, that 3% of the Jewish population, Jewish American population, traditionally was democratic and very pro-Israel. That seems to be a contradiction. And they make up about 50% of the donor class of the Democratic Party. The problem with that is that when I say they're Jewish, they're not Jewish like Israelis are Jewish. They're secular Jews, and they're still liberal. Everybody said they voted in droves for Trump. It was about 35% Trump, 65% no, even after all the things that Biden had done to Israel. So there is what I'm getting at.
But Victor, I was
there's not a Jewish lobbying group in the United States for Israel.
One is let me just interject one thing in relating to American Jews, that there are demographics of American Jews. And by the way, 40% of American Jews from the data that I saw in Pennsylvania voted for Trump, and that meant very low. They do. So that when you're looking at Pennsylvania, which was a key state, that it was a must-win state, the Jews played a major role in winning that state for Trump. And also there are demographics inside of the American Jewish population that voted for Trump in higher margins than, non-college educated white males. So, I mean, you had him getting 97% of the ultra-Orthodox Jews in New York. In New Jersey, the margin between a Republican and Democrat, it basically became a swing state for the first time, 6%. Kamala Harris won New Jersey by just 6%. This is unprecedented. And it was largely because of the Jewish vote. So, it's true that when you look at the absolute numbers and you look at the liberal Jews in places like Los Angeles or New York or Chicago, then they're doing the traditional Jewish thing and voting Democrat. But even in places like Beverly Hills in California and in other areas, you had overwhelming majorities of Jews for Trump. So, I mean, I think, that's also very important. The Jewish population in the United States is very diverse.
It is. And I think I think there's been a renaissance, and you're right. But when you look at the trends over 30 years of the Jewish population, it's very similar to the Greek American population. And when we had the 74 Cyprus War, there was enormous pressure on Turkey to stop that from the Greek lobby. We had about 6 or 7 representatives, a couple of senators, and there was a pretty big Greek. There is no Greek lobby now. It's all been assimilated, and there is no immigration. So what I think what happens is that there is less of a unified Israeli lobby, but it's been mitigated in part because of evangelical and what I'm getting is that when you look at Jewish people in Congress, like a Schumer or somebody, they are not, the Jews in Congress are not strong advocates of Israel in the way that Greeks were. And what's happened also in Michigan, to take one example, they're going to have an imam at the inauguration that's so they were very smart in what they did is they saw that Michigan was a key state and they wanted to have influence with Trump. They thought he was going to win. So what they did was very intricate. They said, basically, we're against Biden because he's anti-Arab and he didn't support Hamas enough. So we're going to support somebody who was even more anti-Hamas than Biden was, and then take credit for getting him elected and have some influence. And that's what they did. So all of these things are jockeying around, and it's hard to know what the role they play in these decision making. But I don't think we can still make any predictions to January 20th. I just don't see Donald Trump being able to give an announcement about the hostages in which he says Israel's going to release 1,000 prisoners and Hamas is going to still be there at blah, blah, blah. He's going to have to say to the American people, under coercion from the United States, Hamas capitulated. And if they don't capitulate and they get a good deal, I don't think it's going to be politically tenable. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I guess the last question that I wanted to ask you again is, in light of how this is being seen in Israel, that this was this deal, which entails a capitulation to some very significant and dangerous demands by Hamas on Israel, including the release of thousands of terrorists, including hundreds of murderers, and the remaining of over nearly 70 hostages in the base case scenario behind in Gaza, with the removal of the bulk of Israeli forces, including from northern Gaza. How is Israel supposed to look at managing our relations with the Trump administration, given the way that it's starting off with us in this war that isn't a war of choice?
It's going to be very difficult. What do you think public opinion is, given the high profile of hostages' families and media in Israel vis-a-vis the rumors of a proposed deal?
I mean, people are torn. I can talk for myself. I'm torn. I mean, we have female hostages there. We have female soldiers who, how could we leave them? How could they have been abandoned that way on October 7th? I mean, the whole thing is just an impossible situation. And then we had a hostage video of one of the female soldiers, Liri Albag, that came out that Hamas released a couple of weeks ago, which was terrifying. And so people are terrified, and we want them back. We want all of them back. And we've lost so many soldiers. We've fought so hard. We've been, completely mobilized, because the vast majority of Israelis, the vast, vast majority, and perhaps not the ones that get interviewed on CNN, but the overwhelming majority of Israelis recognize that we can't long survive if we don't annihilate Hamas, because of what they did and the signal that this sends to all of the nations of the region if we don't, after what they did to us. So I think, there's it's a horrible position that Israel has put in, and it was very shocking to me personally to see the kind of pressure that the incoming administration decided to bring to bear, not on Qatar, which they've been thanking profusely, but on Israel. I'm frankly flabbergasted by it. And
well, what we're going to have to see. I know that the position of the Trump administration, and they're mutually exclusive, is that we're going to get the hostages back, and we're going to make sure Hamas is destroyed. That's the two things they say, and how you can do both at the time is impossible. So Trump wants to be a person who is Reagan-esque and say, I like Reagan. I didn't even have to come in, and they released it out of fear of what I was going to do in Iran. But he also wants to be the one that says, Netanyahu and our two governments destroyed Hamas, and leave the details to be worked out by somebody else. But I think those are the two operating principles that he has. But a lot of us will be very angry if this is a true story and it happens, because if they let the Hamas people back out, they will go right back into the enclaves that are not occupied or have not been entered by the IDF, and they will get a lot of Qatari and Turkish money, and they will start it all up. And 10 years from now, maybe 5, you'll be right back where you were.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it's not mutually exclusive. You can't. What we found, of course, is that particularly with the first hostage rescue that happened in November, is that it happened because Israel was pulverizing Hamas. So you do a slowdown, and especially now when they have a backwind in Syria and in Lebanon and from Turkey, they're not going to capitulate, and they'll never give up willingly all of the hostages, because that's their insurance policy. So, it's one of these things where it seems like getting the hostages out and winning are contradictory, but actually the way to get them out
is here in the United States,
defeating them.
as an observer, rapidity is really important. So what happens in world opinion and here in domestic pressures politically, when Israel was attacked on October 7th, I know it took 3 weeks to you know what I mean, to regroup and get ready and go in. And but that I think if they had gone in earlier and more forcefully, but I'm just using that not to double guess them, but the same thing with Iran. After you suffered 500 projectiles, I think the Netanyahu government was willing to retaliate in a overwhelming force, and we stopped that. Had we not stopped that, there was a window of public opinion worldwide that was almost pro-Israel, and you could have taken the nuclear things out for a week and probably damaged their military irreparably. But every time Israel is put under, either your left-wing governments hesitate or we put pressure on the Netanyahu government, what happens with the passage of time, then the whole apparat of the DI, Arab money, the whole thing kicks in, and the actual reason why Israel has to reply fades into collective memory. And so it's really important when these things happen for Israel to have contingency plans and to strike back immediately within a abbreviated time frame. And I think Netanyahu wanted to do that with Iran, and we know that the Biden administration urged him, and not even urged him, threatened him not to retaliate. But it's looking back, had the United States government said to Israel on October 8th, I know you're not ready, but you've got to go in there right now because I can give you 3 weeks of diplomatic support before our campuses erupt, and I've got all problems in Congress, and they'll want to cut off supplies, and you got to move. But of course, Biden was part of the problem. But I think that's important. Only reason I say that because this is going to come up during the Trump administration. It came up in 2006 when George W. said to your government, you've got to move quickly. I've got about 10 days to restrain everybody. And they didn't.
Right.
And that wasn't the American fault. That was the Omar government's fault. This time it's the United States' fault. But in the future, and I hope it doesn't happen, but even in the Trump administration, a rapid response and a contingency plan is to go right ahead before the world can express its, displeasure or.
So I mean, the last question that I wanted to ask you before I let you go is when we're looking at the way that things have been shaping up over the past couple of weeks with Envoy Witkoff here and with his interesting background with Qatar and the pressure that's being brought to bear by him on Israel here. How are we supposed to? And on the other hand, we have Secretary-designate Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Pete Hegseth as the Secretary of Defense coming in, and others. How are we supposed to be looking at the situation going forward? What are the things that Israel should be bringing? Israel's leadership is supposed to be bringing to bear when we're keeping in mind when we move forward. We have a lot of things that we were hoping to accomplish with the Trump administration in the next couple of years, and we're not off to the fine start that we thought we would be off to.
Well, I would just say be very concerned, have contingencies programs, but don't make any final judgments because as I'm speaking right now, Pete Hegseth is being hammered in his confirmation hearing, and we're going to have Rubio coming up, and none of these people who have been stalwart supporters of Israel in the past are yet in power, and they have no legal authority to do anything. And this envoy does not have any legal authority to do anything. He's freelancing on the order of prepared. And it's all reflective of this consensus that in 2017, in the transition period, they didn't know what they were doing by their own admission. And then it took them 6 months. So they're all ready to go and they're chomping at the bit. And there are people in all of these different branches of government that are more legalistic than others. Some of them are already assuming with the invitation of a discredited Biden administration. They're already assuming power they don't legally have. But once we're into January 20th, you're going to see about 100 executive orders on day one, 200. They're going to move so fast. And at that point, if the special envoy is trying to get a sensational hostage release for the publicity and the momentum and at the expense of Israel's security, there will be a lot of people in the administration, to the extent they can, dissent, because this is a special envoy. He's not a cabinet person with a portfolio. And Rubio is, and if Hegseth's confirmed, I think he will, but he will make these decisions. And I think they will have and the people around Trump that, Stephen Miller, or Jonathan Miller, or a Devin Nunes, who's very close to Trump, they're all very strong supporters of Israel. And they've been criticized for that.
Well, I agree. And, I guess the problem is that this deal is supposed to be implemented before January 20th. That's the whole rush to get it done.
That's this narrative that it's going to be a second Reagan-Iran hostage thing on the day he comes into office. That's what they're doing. And I think a lot of times some people get a vague idea of what Trump wants, and then they feel they will be specially rewarded by just being the person who achieves that impression, but they don't think about all the consequences that come later. I don't know if people have weighed in, but I can guarantee you there are now people that will soon assume power in the Trump administration that have contacted the special envoy with their concern.
All right. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it at that. A lot of promising things in the future, but right now we're in quite the. It's always one of those things with Israel that we can see the future, and yet we're always somehow or another ambushed in the present tense. So it's going to be an interesting.
For all of that, Israel, it's still standing. It's got 500 million people that don't like it in your neighborhood, and it still survives. So.
Well, that's true. So we got something going for us.
Yes, we do.
All right.
You've got divine fate on your side. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. And we also have you on our side, and I thank you for that. Thank you for standing with Israel. It's a wonderful thing to have friends like you. So I appreciate you very much. All right. Well, have a great day, and good luck to you out there in burning California. We didn't talk about the wildfires.
I will.
It's a story in and of itself.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Take care.